Hello out there, guys. Welcome back to the channel. I am back with another video, and I'm really excited to have a previous guest back on the show, which we'll get into in a minute. But before we do, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe. Also, I am walking the YouTube tightrope, let's put it that way. So I really would recommend you subscribe to my other channels over at BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and my backup channel, which I will put links for in the description, and also the Telegram group as well that I also have, because the rug could get pulled at any moment now. I am walking on thin ice. So with that being said, we have got the wonderful Jerry Marzinsky back on the channel. Just a brief introduction about Jerry. Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Jerry is a commercial pilot, certified scuba diver, and long-distance motorcyclist. He has held the position of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scout master. He was awarded the State of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and the Pima College Apple Award of Teaching Abnormal Psychology. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He is the co-author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, and currently has a private practice in Arizona. Jerry's website is jerrymarzinsky.com. And I will put all his other links down in the comments and the description link below. So without further ado, Jerry, how's it going, mate?
It's going. I'm in YouTube jail also. So we're cellmates.
Yeah,
Only
yeah, we're in the naughty corner. So
they threw me out for longer than they threw you out. You got a couple
yeah.
of weeks. I got 6 months.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, I'm surprised I'm still up after all these years, but it is what it is. You know, we're in full spiritual warfare right now, well, physical and spiritual, and you know, it really just it just shoots them in the foot, I think, because when they do that to people, it just credits everything that they say. It gives that person more more credit. It makes you believe them more when they do that. So I don't know why they do that, but it is what it is. But Jerry, I wanted to get you back on because we did a really great two-part interview around about 4 years ago now. And I will put the links into the description for people to go back and revisit, where we really go deep into a lot of things. But you've got a very interesting and incredible background in, you know, working in some of these psychiatric hospitals and wards and all this stuff. You know, with all your qualifications, it's really great that although you have that background, you do have this kind of spidey sense, sixth sense, which has helped you learn about these entities and how they manipulate people. And so just for people that may have missed those interviews, where did it start for you, and how did you get into it, and how did you start realizing that, you know, what these things that people were dealing with were, well, not, they are of this world, but maybe not of this dimension?
No, they're not of this dimension for sure. You know, they're from the energy dimension, which John MACE says there is no time, there is no space, there is no matter in that dimension.
Mm-hmm.
So after I got my master's degree, I went to work in one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. There were like 10,000 patients there when I got there, and nothing in college prepared me for that place. I mean, nothing. And it wouldn't have prepared anybody much for the front lines unless they were in, school counseling or something like that. But, on the front lines, the psychiatric front lines dealing with these people, and especially in that place, it was like I was totally unprepared for what I was facing there. And, but I was fascinated with abnormal psychology. And this place was chock full of it. It was like I was also a adrenaline addict, so it was a perfect place for me. I mean, here's all this pathology, but nowhere in college, in undergraduate or graduate school, did they say what caused this stuff. They just described it,
Yeah.
and it was like, okay, if they described it in detail enough, it made it look like they knew what was going on, but they didn't. They didn't.
They just describe it as like mental illness, don't they?
Well, you got the whole DSM, what is it, 7 now? That Bible of psychiatry.
Okay.
People don't know what that is. Even students going into undergraduate and graduate school don't know where that came from. It's completely made up by a group of 10 psychiatrists who took a whole band of abnormal or normal behavior and turned it into pathology. So it's these detailed descriptions of mental illness with numbers and sub directories, and you open it up, it looks very official. I mean, it looks like they know what they're talking about.
They put all the
But
long words in, don't they?
they put a lot of psychobabble in there, a lot of stuff that a lot of people wouldn't understand, and it's all broken up into categories with subdirectories and it really looks official. The thing is, it only describes behavior.
Hmm.
It just describes abnormal behavior. That's all it does. It doesn't say anything about how to cure it. Matter
Mm.
of fact, they do not know how to cure mental illness.
Hmm.
They have no idea. They don't even know what it is.
Mm.
You know, the back in 1910, the Carnegie Foundation, and who was it? Wasn't the Rothschilds? It was another one of those guys. They took over the mental health or the whole medical system um, with the Flexner report. So it was the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group. Okay, now these guys are the guys who kind of owned the pharmaceutical industry. So they bribed Congress, like they always do, to pass a law sponsoring the infamous Flexner report, which said that no college or university could graduate medical doctors unless they were teaching pharmaceutical medicine.
Mm.
Okay, so it had to be centered around their drugs in
Right.
order for them to train and graduate doctors, and that knocked out everything. I mean, it knocked out virtually most of the universities in the United States. They had to switch their curriculums in order to legally license doctors. And doctors who did graduate, if they taught anything else, naturopathy or any of the stuff Tesla was doing, or all those guys were labeled quacks. And if these doctors attempted to practice any of that, yoga, meditation, any of that, their licenses were at risk, kind of like YouTube now.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? It's like, um, so what do we have now? We have a mental health system with more drugs than have ever existed, more psychiatric drugs that have ever existed anywhere on the planet. You know, and look at what we got. I mean, last year it was like 47,000 people in the United States killed themselves, committed suicide. You
Wow.
know, 50,000 died in Vietnam. But this is year after year after year. Close to 50,000 people are killing themselves every year in the United States.
Yeah.
You know, between 1999 and 2019, the suicide rate increased 33%. You know, suicide or schizophrenics are killing themselves at a rate of 3 to 5% above the general population. And
Mm.
those drugs that they feed these people don't cure anything.
No.
All they're just tranquilizers. They just dumb them down. They
Mm.
don't get rid of the voices. They don't cure anything. they have no idea what causes schizophrenia.
Mm.
You know, they fake like they do, and they started like with blaming mothers. Okay, but you could observe that. You know, then they moved it up into genetics, which we couldn't observe that until some honest geneticists said, "Hey, there is no genetic link." You know, so they had to come up with something else that people couldn't examine. You know,
Mm.
so they're moving it from where you could examine it, you know, to places where you can't examine it, and only a small portion of the population of researchers would take a look at it. So it removes it from it removes the observation of schizophrenia and what causes schizophrenia from the vast majority of the populace, and puts it up in these small segments of, you know, researchers. So recently, they 10 years ago, Eli Lilly, who, when they came out with Prozac, said, "Oh well, you know, mental illness is a chemical imbalance because, you know, our Prozac somehow does something to the serotonin and makes these people feel better somewhat, you know, so it must be a chemical imbalance." So then they pushed this chemical imbalance theory for all mental illnesses,
Mm.
and that lasted for probably 10 years. They got away with it before some honest researchers came along and said, "We don't see a chemical imbalance," you know, and you know, then they found that when they were doing autopsies of these long-term schizophrenics who were using their drugs, and they found that their brains were shrunk like walnuts.
Oh, really?
You know? Oh yeah. So when that was released, big pharma and the psychiatric mafia went nuts. You know, no, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing this. You know, it's like blaming it. They don't even know what schizophrenia. You know, all they see is the behavioral manifestations. They have no idea what causes it. None.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
You know, it's an energetic disorder.
Yes.
You know, it's got to do with the mind, which is, you know, they can't measure the mind. They can't measure the spirit. You know,
No.
they can't measure thoughts. Now, even though they say it's a thought disorder, they move it away from that. You know, it is a thought disorder. That's the closest they ever come to finding, yeah, identifying what it really is.
And
So,
they want to keep people in the five senses, don't they? They don't want people
yeah,
thinking. They want people to think that everything's physical. You know, sight, sound, hearing, taste. That anything outside of that is a no-go. They don't want people exploring energy and, you know, consciousness and everything like that.
no, no, and it's not working. I mean, none of their drugs cure anything. They just tamp down symptoms. So psychology and psychiatry are only concerned with behavior. That's it. And we're spiritual beings. You
Absolutely.
know, if the spirit leaves, we're dead. We're gone. You know, your thoughts are energy. You know, your memory is energy. You know, schizophrenia is a these are energetic beings. These voices these people hear.
Mm.
So, you know, you look at what they're doing. You know, 100,000 Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia every year. You know,
Mhm.
so all these mental illnesses, they went from what 97, you know, when it started off to I don't know what it was in the 60s. And right now it's approaching 300 illnesses that this Bible of theirs that they created. And it's virtually made up. You know, this body of 10 psychiatrists get together and they vote on these mental illnesses.
Mhm.
You know, it's they vote them in, they vote them out, you know. Um, so Dr. Julian Whitaker, he summed it up pretty well. He said every single one of these mental illnesses were fabricated by breaking up segments of human behavior and pathologizing them. There are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, there's no x-rays, there's no EEGs, there's no test to validate a single one of these diagnoses in that manual. You know, they're just classes of behaviors that a group of psychiatrists have voted to be mental disorders. So they vote them in, they vote them out. You know, um, you know the who was this? It was Network Against Psychiatric Assault says the DSM-5 labels almost all human emotion as mental illness. A child who talks back, a man who spends too much time on the internet, a woman who grieves the death of her husband or child for more than 2 weeks are all labeled as mentally ill and told they need to be drugged. Unhappiness is labeled as depression, and people are encouraged to numb themselves with drugs instead of dealing with the life situations that cause their unhappiness. Over 2/3 of the psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-5 have financial ties to the drug industry. So they vote in these disorders that they think that the big pharma can come up with some kind of drug to treat, and those pass. You know,
It's such a wide umbrella now, though, isn't it? Like you hear it so often, like mental illness, that term. Like it's almost like anything, like what you're reading out there, anything can get put under that umbrella. And
oh
of
yeah,
course, the go-to solution is always the pharmaceutical drugs, right?
well, no, they'd have no solutions. Those drugs don't cure anything.
Yeah.
You know, now look at some of these diagnoses that they threw in there: mathematics disorder,
I think,
caffeine
I think
intoxication disorder.
I think I've got mathematics disorder.
I'm afraid of mathematics. Sibling relational disorder. So if siblings are fighting with others,
Right.
it's a
Okay.
relational disorder.
That's a mental
Sexual
illness.
sexual orientation disturbance, homosexuality.
Right.
Now get these: Florence syndrome, being overwhelmed by beauty, such as in Florence, Italy. Fainting and dizziness are the symptoms. The treatment is antidepressants.
Oh, of course. You don't want to
Paris
be too happy.
Paris syndrome. Mostly Japanese patients visiting France. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecution. You know, before the DSM, they would have called it cultural shock. You know,
That's crazy.
yeah. In 1952, there were 106 psychiatric disorders. In 1980, there were 256. Now, 297. There's no scientific proof for any of them. And they treat this in the college and the medical schools as if it's the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, they hand it out and they make you memorize it. They make you memorize the classes and what they mean, and they give you tests on it. And this is all fabricated. It's all freaking made up by these bozos up there. They
Yeah.
use it to document for insurance claims. They have to have, you know, schizophrenia 3.90 something, and these sub things, and they use it for insurance claims.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they use it to label people, and it does not describe people. It describes a specific class of behavior. It's sick what they're doing. I
Yeah.
mean, and the money they're making off of these diagnoses are crazy. The antidepressant market is expected to hit 15.98 by 2023. They said billion, 15.98 billion. And these drugs don't cure depression.
No.
You know, global antipsychotic sales. This is the drugs that shrink the brain
Yeah.
and rot out the peripheral nervous system if you use them long enough. It's
I've been
about to
around
hit.
people that, sorry to interject there, but I've been around people that are on antidepressants, and it's almost like they don't feel anything. It's like at times when they're supposed to feel sad or angry or happy, that it's like it just nulls everything. It's quite sad, really.
Yeah, it is. It just dumbs them down. And it
Yeah.
does the same thing with schizophrenics, you know, and the antipsychotic sales worldwide. I mean, this is a worldwide scam that these drugs cure anything. 14.54 billion in 2021, expected to reach 15.5 billion by 2022. Yeah. So what these are major tranquilizers that they just dumb the person down. They virtually turn them into zombies, you know.
So what made you, because you came from this background, this medical background, and you went through all the, let's call it
Brainwashing.
brainwashing, you got your brainwashed.
I got my brain
You
washed.
got your brainwashed. So at what point did the old ticker start going and you were starting to think, hang on a minute, something's not quite right with what I'm being told here and what I'm seeing?
Well, that was quite early. It was in undergraduate psychology. Okay, so here they are feeding us with all this stuff. Learn all this stuff, regurgitate it back to us. You'll get a mark on your test. Treating it as if it were the truth.
Yeah.
And I was very suspicious of all authority figures going into college. And I look in the back of these manuals, or these books, and it's like this guy got this information from this guy, who got it from this guy, who got it from this guy, who got it from that guy, who got it. Was like intellectual incest.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it was almost like if enough of them endorse and print the same stuff, it becomes real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So at that point, I'm like, and they didn't give us any access to a clinical population at all.
Okay.
You couldn't get into a mental hospital. You couldn't get into a mental health center. You couldn't work in the student counseling center. You did they cut you off from any access, and the institutions themselves would cut you off to any access. Matter of fact, in the close to 40 years I've been working in these psychiatric institutions, all levels of them: mental health centers, psychiatric hospitals, mental health centers, emergency rooms, the whole gamut throughout, that they have in the US. I haven't seen one researcher anywhere on the front lines of any of those institutions ever. They wouldn't let them in.
Mm.
Oh, we can't risk the danger of allowing you into these institutions. We can't there's too much insurance risk. We can't account. They won't let them in.
Mm.
You try to get into a prison that's try to study schizophrenics or mental illness or anything else. No, you're not going to get in. And same thing with psych hospitals. They won't let you in. Matter of fact, I was talking to one nurse when she was doing her internship. They told her not to even look at these people. Well,
Yeah.
when you get on the psych ward, they're so dangerous. Don't even look at them. Don't look them in the eye. Make sure you don't make eye contact. I mean, it's so bizarre what they're doing.
Do you know what's interesting about that, Jerry? Like you, I've got a bit of a sadistic personality in that I'm fascinated by all this dark stuff and, these mind schisms and everything like that. But quite often when you hear like in these murder documentaries or where someone is going to be raped or something like that, the murderer or the rapist will often say, don't look at me, don't look at my eyes. And sometimes people report them of actually turning black, which is obviously that
Yeah, but
entity.
I've heard that a number of times.
Yeah.
I've actually seen it. I've experienced it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so so that was my first inkling, was the way they kept us away from clinical populations. There's nowhere. The only thing you could check out was experimental psychology in the rat lab. You can go there and you can actually watch these reinforcement schedules work. Even in the master's degree, they finally gave us access to prisoners in a prison, but they weren't mental prisoners. They were just regular prisoners. You know, so they won't let students, they won't let researchers in on the front lines to look at these people. So while I was in undergraduate school, I remember they in abnormal psychology, they ordered us to read a paper written by a clinical psychologist, which said if two crazy people had the same delusion, so if both of them thought they were Macron and they met, one of them would have to give way and change his delusion. And I'm like, why would that have to happen? I mean, they're both nuts. Why would one of them have to change to something else? And here's this guy wrote this big fancy paper in APA format and looked all, all fancy and met all the writing parameters for this kind of stuff. And 8 years fast forward, when I was in the psychiatric hospital, I was doing my rounds on the second floor, and I saw a new patient I hadn't seen before, and he's carrying on this conversation with somebody, and there was nobody he was talking to. He's just walking around carrying on this conversation. So I kind of crept up as close as I could get to him from behind, and I'm listening. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but it was like one side of a telephone conversation,
Mm.
and he was talking in complete sentences. And of course, psychiatry would say he was hallucinating because there wasn't anybody he was directly speaking to. But these were complete paragraphs and complete sentences. It wasn't word salad like I was led to believe in college. Where they're just babbling incoherently, and these are hallucinations. That no, he was carrying on a coherent conversation with somebody. I couldn't see who it is. I couldn't hear who it was, and he caught me. So I'm standing behind him, and he turns around, and I said, I haven't seen you before. You knew? He said, yeah. And I said, what's your name? And he said, I'm Jesus Christ. And I looked at him in the eye. I said, no, I'm Jesus Christ. So I'm going, okay, let's see what happens here. So that was, I held that in the back of my mind for like 8 years, waiting for the chance to check this out. And he kind of cocks his eyes and he looks up, and he thinks about it a minute. He looks me in the eye and he goes, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he struts off. And I went, okay, so what else have they lied to me about? Right away, it's like, yeah. So while I'm working there, everybody was brainwashed to believe that these voices these people were hearing were hallucinations. They didn't think anything more about it. They didn't want to know what they were being told, what they were, how they behaved. They didn't want to know anything about it. It was like, they're hallucinations. We already know what they are. They're not worth anything else. And that's what the universities are teaching, without having done one iota of research on these things at all. It's like the psychiatric high priest go, we hereby declare, and the pharmaceutical industry come up behind. Yeah, we agree. These are hallucinations. The only thing you could do is take drugs for them.
Yeah.
So they teach it in the universities because the universities have been taken over by big pharma. So they teach what they teach what big pharma said they need to teach. And anybody who tries to publish anything against big pharma is going to have a hard time getting anything published. Anybody who supports big pharma is going to just breeze right through. They have all the journals and all that kind of, they're going to just make it right through. So I was curious. I mean, nobody knew what these things were saying. So I started asking these patients, what are these voices telling you? Because I saw a one-to-one correspondence between their behavior and them getting in trouble and they're listening to these voices. So it took about 1.5 years to figure out how to talk to them about them, because they were extremely gun shy. If they talked to a psychiatrist about the voices, or they talked to a psych nurse or a counselor, the counselor would report it to the psychiatrist would increase their drugs and turn them into zombies. They didn't want any trouble out of them. So, it was interesting that they pretty much ignored the voices until the patient was telling somebody that the voices were telling them to kill themselves. If a psychiatrist heard that, man, he moved like somebody poked him in the butt with a hot poker. He locked that person down, increased their drugs, put them on suicide watch. They didn't want them suiciding on their watch because that looked bad for them. So all of a sudden the voices became real. Oh, the voices are telling them to do this. We better do something about it. You talk about schizophrenic behavior. And they didn't even realize it. It was like, so I'm watching these guys as psychiatrists, and I was sitting in the office with one of my clients and a psychiatrist, and then the patient was complaining about the voices. And the psychiatrist told him, well, okay, I'll increase your meds. Just ignore the voices. They're hallucinations.
Just ignore.
And I called that guy back a week later, just out of curiosity, and I pulled him in my office. I said, well, the psychiatrist told you to ignore your voices. I said, how's that going? He said, not good. He said, they get louder. So then I started asking all the other psychotics on my caseload, what happens when you ignore the voices? Every single one of them said they get louder. They won't be ignored.
Interesting.
That is now a pattern, So I'm started seeing these patterns. One of the patterns was that they were consistently negative. They weren't random. It was they consistently negative. They weren't like good, bad, neutral. They didn't run any range. They were consistently negative. What held them on a consistently negative pattern? Why weren't they random? That was the first thing. Like, what's going on here? I didn't know at the time. I didn't believe in demons and all that kind of stuff. Another pattern I saw was, even though the psychiatrists are telling everybody and the universities are telling everybody that this is a biochemical imbalance in their brain, I never, ever saw a psychiatrist give any kind of baseline lab to find out what neurotransmitters in the brain were out of balance by how much, never.
Mm.
So how do they know what they're treating and what they're doing? How did they know what's out of balance by how much and which one? There's like 23, I think, neurotransmitters in the brain. Which one is out of balance and by how much? I mean, they're telling everybody it's a chemical imbalance. That's what they're teaching in the colleges and the universities, the medical schools. You know, where's their proof? Why are they treating this when they don't know what they're treating? And I'm like, so I asked one of them. I said, well, what's the baseline? How do you know what's out of balance by how much? The guy said, oh, the pharmaceutical industry takes care of that for us. They tell us which drugs to give her. And I'm like thinking, you let the fox in the hen house, man. What are you thinking? And that's what they're doing. They just follow what the drug industry says. The drug industry puts out all this. Hey, we got a new antipsychotic drug. Yeah, try this. It has less side effects. Oh yeah, we'll try it. So they're just using the population as guinea pigs for the drug industry.
Mm.
They got away with that for over a decade. Now some what do you call, more ethical researchers did the research, and they said we can't find a biochemical imbalance. We don't find any genetic markers. So they lost that, but they're still pushing it. If you look at their drug advertisements now, it's like, oh, it is believed or it is suspected that
Mm.
schizophrenia is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. No, it's not. It's caused by the voices.
Mm.
Now, the more I studied these voices, the more patterns that started appearing. So the next one was anti-religious. I had psych patients coming to me telling me, hey, they don't like the Bible. They don't like me going to church. They get louder when I go to church. When I recite the 23rd Psalm, one guy said it's like the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So I'm like, why would a hallucination care about church? Why would a hallucination care about the Bible?
Mm.
Why would a hallucination go nuts if somebody recited the 23rd Psalm? So I started seeing these patterns appear. Now, if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run patterns.
Yeah.
So pattern after pattern after pattern over time. So what we're talking about here is an energetic attack. So your mind is energetic. Your spirit is energetic. Your thoughts are energetic. These things are thoughts. They come through the patient as thoughts. Now, they're not their thoughts, but they act like they're their thoughts. They want them to believe that they're their thoughts. So they're being inserted in the patient's thought stream to tell them to do this, to do that, and a lot the patients struggle with that. Is how do I tell the difference between my own thoughts and these entities, these voices?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so these things are energetic. So you can't see energy. You can't see a magnetic field. You can't see it. You can't feel it. You can't taste it. Gravity. You can't see it. You can't feel it. You can't taste it. You only see it by the effects it has on the physical environment. Okay? So if you get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on a magnet, then you can see the outline of the magnetic field. Well, it's the same thing with these voices. These are energetic beings. They're negative energetic beings. They're also parasites. They drain the person of their energy, but they run patterns. So these patterns that I'm going to read you are the physical manifestation of what these things are. Okay, so they're equivalent to the magnetic field and the iron filings. Okay, so they're negative, they're anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion, they feed off of that negative emotion, they energetically drain their victims. Okay, so after the patient is attacked by these voices, their energy level drops to nothing. And you ask them, did you use that energy? No, I wasn't exercising. I was tossing and turning in bed all night. But yet they're so drained they can't even get up for breakfast. These things get louder after sunset. Now, another interesting thing that you might keep your attention on is these patterns that I'm reading you are the same patterns that the mainstream media is feeding us right now and all throughout the pandemic. I mean, the mainstream media was broadcasting these same things: negativity, anti-religion, negative emotion. Um, uh, you can't ignore them. They took over the airwaves. They were coming at you from all directions. They foster isolation. You know, they foster self-destructive behavior. They demand the attention of their victims. They maneuver for increased control over their victims. They gaslight. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory, because memory is energetic also. Okay, so they can go in there and they can pull up every rotten memory that that patient has, and they can rub it in their face until they lower their vibration into they get depressed and down to their own vibration. It's only then that they can take the energy. They can't take the energy when they're feeling good or they're feeling positive. So they demand that the victim not tell anybody about their presence. You know, it's kind of like you know, the mainstream media hiding behind everything, like you know, don't tell anybody that the propaganda that we're putting out. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything these voices are saying. You know, you can't make bargains with them. They won't keep them. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. You know, they can manipulate feeling without speaking. I mean, these guys could be sitting there doing okay one minute and all of a sudden they just feel awful. You know, they short circuit reason, which gets these guys in a lot of trouble. They try to pass themselves off as the patient's own thoughts, and they sound like them. Matter of fact, a lot of patients I had at the state hospital, they'd ask the voices, "Who are you? What are you?" They would say, "We are you."
Mm.
So they want the patient or the schizophrenic to believe that those thoughts that they're putting in the patient's head are who they are, that they belong to them. And we're told from the time we're born, you know, any thought that comes into your head belongs to you. That's far from true. That's far from true. You know, and everybody's experienced this. You know, you're walking down the sidewalk minding your own business, and then all of a sudden you get this horrendous thought like, you know, jump in front of that bus. Or if you're standing on a bridge, well, what would it be like to jump? Or, you know, stuff. It's stuff that you would never think on your own. It
Yeah.
doesn't belong to you. It's so adverse to who you normally are that it shocks you. Those thoughts come from them.
Yeah.
Okay, they foster selective forgetting. So if you give these schizophrenics exercises to do to fight the voices, if they don't write them down, by the time you're done speaking to them, they won't remember a single one of them.
Mm.
You know, they fill the mind with negative thoughts about self and others. They don't want you to have any positive relationships. They don't want you to have a girlfriend. They hate relationships. They want to break up all positive relationships. They'll tell the man that the woman's cheating on him. They'll tell the woman the man's cheating on him. They'll do anything they can to break up relationships. They destroy positive self-concept. They attempt to pull their victim away from consensual reality. So the reality that we normally function in every day. You know, they, yeah, the patient might be walking down the sidewalk and they see somebody and they go, "That guy's following me," or some people start laughing and the voices tell them they're laughing at you. You know, they use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. Um, they are averse to anything positive and beautiful. They don't want these people going to parks. They don't want them watching anything beautiful, sunsets, that kind of stuff. They get very upset, and I saw this in the emergency room. You know, I had to be very careful there too because it was dominated by psychiatrists. Okay, and I'd gotten in trouble twice in the state hospital for when psychiatrists found out I was asking patients about what these voices were and what they were telling the patients. I was pulled up into their office and given the, you know, the riot act saying you will not do that. You know, these voices are hallucinations. Everybody knows that. You know,
Yes. Get
like
back on track. with the
Yeah, and all,
program.
yeah, get with the program. And it's like you're making the patients worse by asking them questions about the hallucinations. What you're doing is reinforcing their hallucinations.
All
And I'm
right.
thinking, yeah, you freaking moron. You don't
Yeah,
even know what you're talking about. But boy, you couldn't tell one of them that, you know.
of course.
So they want to render the victim useless. So they're useless to society and themselves and everybody else. They hate and they torment babies. They hate babies. You know,
Mm.
they hate children. You know,
That's interesting. You see often with these like ghost videos that the baby in the cot is got, you know, getting all this interference, and I don't know if you've seen any of those videos, but it does seem to be that I think children and babies, their frequency is naturally higher,
right.
and so that's like not good for them.
No, it's not. No, they want to bring that down. Matter of fact, I had one patient that I was working with. He said he went on what is that one they tried to ban where they have these short clips.
TikTok,
Um, no, it's not Peacock. It's
no, TikTok,
TikTok.
yeah,
TikTok. He said he would go onto TikTok and look at babies laughing. He said it tormented his voices so bad it drove them crazy.
really,
And I
wow,
said, that's interesting,
yeah.
you know. So they don't want them watching anything spiritual,
Mhm.
you know. So there's a lot of things you can do to fight back against these things, and you know that too because you've walked them out of the people.
Yeah.
You know, I've walked them out into the light, but then there's the big ones. I won't mess with them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, the way I've seen the way down the years, I've seen. I think we're all, as you mentioned there, we're all subject to entity attachments, but some people have more than others, and some people have more stronger attachments than others that can be more problematic. And you know, the case in point is the schizophrenics that you know have got a very strong attachment that is kind of running the show for them. I would say I would use those words. And when it comes to like murderers and people like that, I would say that the entity is literally almost fully hosting that person
yeah,
to the point where the person isn't really a human; it's a demon incarnate in a human body. And I think that's what we're really dealing with here on this planet, which is it's incredible when you think about it.
yeah. All these mass shootings and stuff. You know, and you know, I've talked to prisoners in the prison who committed some heinous act, and they said, I don't remember doing it
Mm,
because they didn't do it. The voices took them over and did it.
yeah,
You know, and these horrendous, you know, shootings, these murders, and it's coming to a boil right now because there's a massive spiritual battle going on this planet right now. And it is just boiling over. Stuff is coming to the surface that has never surfaced before for people to see. And you know, the high priests, you know, they're just drugging people senseless. I mean, they're after the kids now.
mm,
I mean, the drugging of the kids is incredible. There's as of 2017, and there's a lot more now. There's over 1 million children in the U.S. under the age of 6 on psychiatric drugs. There's over 622,000. Now, this is 2017 figures. It's much higher right now, much higher. Over 622,000 under the age of 5 are on psychiatric drugs. 80,000, over 80,000 are on ADHD drugs, which are amphetamines. Okay. And I've run into a bunch of prisoners in the prison who started off on these drugs and just kept going and going and going until the Ritalin or the Adderall wasn't enough and they moved to meth. And then they ended up getting thrown in prison because of their behavior. Over 38,000 children are on antidepressants right now. Over 85,000 are on antipsychotics. Now, these are the drugs that rot your brain out. They got them on with kids. They're putting kids on these things. They turn kids into zombies. You know, over 389,000 are on anti-anxiety drugs. You know, this is nuts. You know, this is nuts what they're doing.
yeah.
Now, you know, I'd like to take a quick peek at the mental health of the high priests that are running this mental health system of ours, the Western mental health system. So they're pushing them out by the thousands with these fancy diplomas, proclaiming they are mental health experts. Okay, so they're working with a population, schizophrenics, that have one of the highest suicide rates of any of the mental illnesses. So you might infer that a population with a very high incidence of suicide is a fairly unstable population. You know? So the National Mental Health Institute estimated that 4.9% of people with schizophrenia will die by suicide. Their suicide rate is 5 to 10 times that of the general population. We know they're not stable. Okay. Now you take a look at uh, the how the high priests are doing, who run our mental health system. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 65 per 100,000, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population, and about equal with that of schizophrenics. So their suicide rate is virtually identical to the most seriously mentally ill of the entire population they're dealing with. The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in 1980 did a 5-year study of 18,730 consecutive physician deaths by suicide and found that psychiatrists suicide regularly year by year at rates more than twice those expected, and that the difference is statistically significant. These are the high priests who run our mental health centers right now. They run the mental health systems. And you look at their popularity among patients. Okay, so looking at assault rates over all jobs based on a study of 120,000 assaults from 1987 to 1992 over 5 years, reported the assault rate for all jobs was 12.6 per thousand. The assault rate for doctors other than psychiatrists was 16.2 per thousand. The assault rate for custody staff, these are psychiatric custody staff who are around patients 24 hours a day, are 69 per thousand. The assault rate on psychiatrists for the little bit of time that they spend on these patients, around these patients, according to the American Medical Association, is 65 per thousand, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population. So they're being assaulted at a rate much, much higher than virtually anybody else in the population. Yeah.
Incredible. I remember from our last interview, I don't remember the exact story, but I'm sure you do. But I remember when you told it, it was fascinating that when it was time for the meds, you said that they all acted the same way, the people acted all the same way. Do you remember talking about that? Do you know what I'm talking about with there?
Well, what comes to mind is they would eventually all go off their meds.
Okay. Ah, right. Yeah, that might have been it.
Yeah, they didn't take them. I mean, because they have awful side effects. So after a while, you get tired of dealing. They're toxic side effects.
Mm,
It's the drug is actually poisoning them.
mm.
It's very slowly, but it's also
But
tamping them down.
the voices were telling them not to take the drugs.
Well, I found that out toward the end with one gal. Um, she was about to be she was in cosmetology school in the psychiatric rehab center I was working in. She'd gone off her drugs 3 times, and that was the limit. They went off their drugs 3 times. Back then, we didn't know anything else about how to treat schizophrenia. We didn't. Nobody suspected that the voices were negative entities. I mean, I didn't want to believe it, even though I was seeing evidence of it.
Mm.
And it took quite a bit more to bring down my denial system, like a lot more. But we brought this gal in. We were about to discharge her. Her mother found out about it. Her mother called me and begged me not to do that because she couldn't handle him, handle this person. She'd been round and round with her. So I said, okay, come on up and we'll talk to her. And the mother said, we'll figure out why. And so she came up one Friday evening, and we brought the girl in, and we're asking her, this is the third time you've been off your drugs. You knew that you were going to get kicked out after the third time. Why did you go off your drugs? And her mother's begging her, tell him, why did you go off your drugs? Both of us are, begging, why did you do this? You shot yourself in the foot. You had a career. You had a job. You were about to get your license. and you blew it up. You just blew it. Why'd you do that? She goes, well, you won't believe me. I said, I've heard a lot of weird things while I've been working here. I don't think you're going to tell me anything that's going to surprise me. So she said, okay, okay. The voices told me not to take it. They told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me.
Mm,
And they pointed to the side effects as proof that he was poisoning me.
mm,
And in effect, it's true.
mm,
They're toxic side effects of the drugs. They're the drugs are somewhat they're toxic,
mm,
you know. So right away, that clicked mind is like, okay, so that's why all these psychiatrists are getting beat up only by schizophrenics. They're not getting beat up by anybody else in the psychiatric population. It's the neurotics aren't beating them up, the bipolars aren't beating them up. It's mostly the psychotics.
mm,
So I was for years I was trying to why aren't they taking their drugs? So I did this experiment where on a 1 to 10 scale kind of thing, like I was asking what's worst. And I went to the DSM and I copied all the symptoms of florid psychosis, schizophrenia, all the nasty symptoms. And then all the ones that went off their drugs, I'd bring them in my office. I'd say, I want you to write down all the reasons you went off your drugs, and what side effects you had. And, you know, the reasons was basically the side effects. And I said, what side effects did you have? Because they all didn't have the same side effects. So they'd write down, 4 or 5 side effects that were awful. And then I'd give them the 2 sheets back, the one with all the psychotic symptoms and their side effects. I said, which one of these is worse? Every single one of them said the symptoms of schizophrenia was much worse than the side effects.
mm.
This went on for 3 friggin' years. And when I asked them, why did you go off your medicines? Every single one of them said, I don't know. The answer came with that one gal. That was the 7th year I was at the state hospital. Then it was like all these little pieces of the puzzle then clicked together at that point. Why
Yeah.
psychiatrists were getting beat up over everybody else. Psych nurses weren't getting beat up. Psychologists weren't getting beat up. Counselors weren't getting beat up. Chaplains weren't getting, nurses weren't getting beat up. It was psychiatrists.
Mm,
What just popped to mind is the true story. Okay. What they taught us in college was schizophrenics are too disorganized to do complex planning. You know, I believe that. That was the stuff they put down in the stuff you had to memorize. So one day I got a call from a friend of mine who was doing, had the same job I did in a different unit. He said, come on over here. You got to see this. And he said, hurry up, before they clean it up. I said, well, okay. So I ran over there and he took me to the psychiatrist's office. So this psychiatrist was very unique in his building. This guy acted like Sigmund Freud, dressed like Sigmund Freud, smoked a pipe like Sigmund Freud, had a kind of smoking jacket like Sigmund Freud, and acted like Sigmund Freud, very, very hooty. I mean, I looked at him and I'm like, what planet did this guy come from? So they didn't have the highest quality psychiatrist at the institutions there. And we went into his office, and here was this load of crap right smack in his middle of his desk, shaped into a pipe. So what had happened is one of the patients on the 3rd floor, who he had just drugged mercilessly, okay, got pissed off, somehow snuck down 3 flights of stairs past 3 nursing stations, got to the 1st floor, broke into his office without making any noise, crawled up onto his desk and crapped right in the middle of his desk, shaped it into a pipe, and then escaped from the hospital, and they never caught him again.
My God, that's crazy.
There were a lot of crazy things happen there.
I imagine every day was interesting. I mean, I find that with what I do, just some of the stories you hear, and one thing I talk about on my channel is how these entities are master masqueraders.
Oh yeah.
I work with one guy, and I've told this story several times, but it's good for context to tell it again. That thought he was dealing with his dead dad, his deceased dad, and this entity was giving him all this information because they know us, right?
Right.
And,
They can pull up any information out of your mind that you have there because they're
right.
energetic. Your memory's energetic. They can go in there and pull up every rotten thing you've ever done.
Yeah. So this guy was getting all this information about himself, and
And it
this
was accurate.
yeah, this entity was saying, "I'm your dad. You know, I'm still around you. Don't worry." So this guy was following all the information that he was being told to do by this voice. He ended up losing his job, his wife. He nearly ended up dying, right? And this is what triggers a lot of people in my messages is that these entities, they'll mask themselves that
Oh yeah.
whatever your flavor is, whatever your favorite flavor is, they'll mask themselves to that. I mean, you said it right at the start. That guy said that I'm Jesus, right?
Right.
And so they don't care what you believe in, as long as you believe in something, and then they'll show up in that form.
Yeah. I'm Jesus Christ, or I'm your guardian angel, or I'm your spirit guide, you know,
Absolutely,
and they suck a lot of people in on that spirit guide thing,
so
and once they let them in, they're in.
yeah, yeah, that's it. They're connected. It's almost like there's an energetic cord between the entity
Right.
and that person.
Once you let them in, that Ouija boards are extremely dangerous. They are not toys. I've
Yeah.
dealt with a lot of patients who have gone psychotic after using Ouija boards.
Mhm.
Meth is another one. You
Yeah,
know, the prisoners called it the devil's drug.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and that's very insidious because it makes you feel, so good, you're high and you're powerful and you got tons of energy you know, and then they start hearing the voices for a while they're on meth. And
yeah,
that may go on for a month, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, where when they come back down, the voices disappear.
yeah,
And then one day they don't.
yeah.
They're there forever. And that person is now as psychotic as any of the ones in the state hospital.
Yeah.
Meth is an extremely dangerous drug.
Well, we haven't even spoken about alcohol. I mean, alcohol is ingrained in society. You know, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, I'm here in Mexico. It's deep in the culture. I'm from the UK. It's deep in the culture there. You know, you get married, you get drunk, you finish your work for the day, you get drunk. It's a weekend, you get drunk. What does that do? It opens you up
Well,
to these.
yeah, it has its own spirit of its own spirit, and I don't know how many times I've heard that they hang around bars and wait for people to get drunk enough, and then they jump in there and they take over the drinking. So it's not just the guy who's drinking; it's all these spirits who can't get drunk in their spiritual form, and they need a body to get drunk in.
Absolutely. And that's why people, when the morning after, the person will say to them, God, you were like a totally different person last night when you were drunk. Well, that's because the person's become hosted by the entity. And, it just, people don't want to hear that because people like to drink. But this is the information that's
Well,
true, I believe.
Well, you look at building up to a drink.
Mm.
These guys are having, and what they say is, with drug addicts and alcoholics, that entity never leaves your auric field. It's always there taunting you. Oh,
Mm.
you can have one drink, or you can go to the bar to talk to your friends and not drink, or So what they call it building up to a drink. So it's all these little steps where that entity gets you to move closer and closer to drinking.
Yeah,
You know,
just have one.
just have one, or you can go by the bar and just kind of look in the window, or uh,
But another thing I want to point out, which was interesting, which again crosses over with what I've found in my work, is that they don't want you doing anything that's gonna, I don't know, like raise your frequency to the point
no,
you touched on it earlier, where they don't even want you to go for a walk in the woods or
right,
down the beach because
right,
they don't like nature. You know, when we go outside, we feel better. You know, we connect with nature. They don't like that. And I've noticed sometimes that, sometimes I'll think about going to the beach and then something will be like, oh no, just stay and do some more work. And I'm like, hang on a minute. No, I'm going to the beach.
right, right.
So
Yeah, yeah. You got to pay attention to your thoughts. What's coming into your head?
yeah, absolutely. They
Because
want
they don't
you,
all belong to you. They don't belong to
no,
you.
they
Not
don't.
all.
They want you all around Wi-Fi and they want it around
Right.
the electromagnetic frequencies that are completely probably toxic for us all. I think that these frequencies now with the five, you know what, the Wi-Fi and everything like that, I think that that makes it easier for them to interface with this dimension, and we are more subject to more of them interfering with us right now. So they've done something planetary to make that interface easier. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The voices in our heads are a lot of the time not all of our own. So but
Yeah, well, Swedenborg says that he's a Christian mystic that lived 300 years ago. He said that none of your thoughts are your own. They either come in from the good side or the bad side, but you're the decider. You're the one who decides which ones you're going to act on and which ones you're not. You know, so it's like what the Indian said, you feed, you know, whichever wolf you feed is the one that grows.
Yeah, absolutely. Jerry, we're going to have to wrap it up there, unfortunately. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. We've got so much crossover with the information that we share. I think it was really good to do this again. So where can people find you? Where's the best place people can find you?
Well, they can find me at the jerrymarzinsky.com. It's MARZINSKY. Also, Sherry and I published this book, An Amazing Journey Through the Psychotic Mind. This will tell you about how we came to the conclusion that these entities are entities and they're not hallucinations, and gives you some suggestions of how you can fight back against them. You can get that at it's on Amazon, and it's in German, it's in French, it's in Spanish, and lulu.com is another place you can get it.
Great, great. Well, I'll put all of Jerry's links in the description below. But yeah, once again, thanks for coming on, Jerry, and we'll speak again, I'm sure.
Okay, glad to have me.